Today, we're talking about a conflict that totally reshaped the world, but for some reason, it's often called the Forgotten War. We're diving into the Korean War, a story of division, global power plays, and a fight that, believe it or not, never technically ended.
And that really gets us to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, how is it possible that North and South Korea, after more than 70 years, are still formally at war? It sounds crazy. To answer that, we've got to rewind the clock all the way back to the end of World War II.
You see, the whole story really begins in the shadow of an even bigger conflict. The battle lines of the Cold War were being drawn all over the globe, and the Korean Peninsula was about to become one of the first and most brutal battlefields. What's just wild about this is how fast it all happened. In 1945, there was this incredible moment of hope. Korea was finally free from Japanese rule. But in the blink of an eye, just 3 years later, that hope is shattered by a division right along a line on a map, the 38th parallel. And by 1949, this wasn't some peaceful border. No, it was a total flashpoint with constant bloody clashes.
And this right here, this is the new reality. You've basically got two rival states, each with a leader who is absolutely determined to unify the country under his ideology. In the north, you have Kim Il-sung, and he's got the Soviet Union in his corner. In the south, you have Syngman Rhee, with the full backing of the United States. It was a perfect recipe for disaster.
So all that tension? It was about to snap. Those border skirmishes and political standoffs finally exploded into a full-scale invasion that took the entire world completely by surprise.
This is the date you need to remember, June 25, 1950. This is the day the Cold War officially turned hot. Thousands of North Korean troops just poured across that border, and they completely overwhelmed the South Korean defenses. The capital, Seoul, fell in just a matter of days.
The international reaction was immediate. For the U.S., this was a massive red flag. They saw it as the first domino falling in a global communist takeover. So they pushed for action, and in a really historic move, the brand new United Nations authorized military force. A coalition of 16 countries came together, all led by this larger-than-life American general, Douglas MacArthur. Honestly, this was the first real test of this whole new post-war world order.
What happens next is just one of the most unpredictable phases of any modern war. The front lines didn't just move a little bit. They swung violently back and forth across the entire country, just like a giant pendulum.
So even with the UN jumping in, that initial push from the north was just devastating. By September, only a few months in, the UN and South Korean forces were literally trapped in a tiny corner of the peninsula with their backs to the sea. It looked like the war was already over. But then, MacArthur rolls the dice on a huge, high-risk gamble. He comes up with this audacious plan to land a massive force by sea at a place called Inchon, way behind enemy lines. The goal? Cut off their supplies and take back Seoul. It was an absolutely insane idea. And it worked. Perfectly. It completely changed the game. So, with the North Korean army totally shattered, UN forces are now surging north. They cross back over the 38th parallel and push all the way to the Yalu River, which is the border with China. Victory felt so close you could almost taste it. But they were about to step on a hornet's nest. Suddenly, a human wave of 300,000 soldiers pours across the border from China. Now, they were officially called the People's Volunteers, which was a clever way to hide that China was officially in the war. China simply was not going to tolerate a US-backed country on its doorstep. They sent in hundreds of thousands of troops, and the pendulum of war swung violently all the way back. After the massive shock of China's entry, the entire nature of the war changed. The days of rapid, sweeping advances were over. What came next was a brutal, grinding deadlock that would last for the next 2 long years.
The whole thing devolved into something that looked a lot like World War I. Both sides dug into trenches right around that original border, the 38th parallel, and they fought these horrific, bloody battles for nameless hills, just trying to wear the other side down. The goal wasn't a big victory anymore, it was just to outlast the enemy.
MacArthur himself said it best: "We face an entirely new war." But his proposed solution was, well, it was extreme. He wanted to expand the war into China, maybe even use nuclear weapons. This put him on a collision course with President Truman, who was terrified of starting World War III. That disagreement ultimately got MacArthur fired in 1951.
And here's the really tragic part. Even while this horrible fighting was raging on, the two sides actually started talking about peace. But the talks stalled for 2 agonizing years.
They argued over the border, what to do with prisoners of war, all while men were still dying on the front lines every single day. So let's talk about how the fighting finally stopped. Because this conflict didn't end with a bang, it just paused, leaving these deep, permanent scars on Korea and the entire world.
Okay, finally, on July 27, 1953, they signed an armistice. And if you take away one thing from this, it's this. An armistice is not a peace treaty. It's a ceasefire. All it does is stop the shooting. It doesn't actually end the war. And it created the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, that heavily armed buffer zone that's still there today.
The human cost of this stalemate is it's staggering. An estimated 5 million people died. And we need to be clear, the vast majority were not soldiers. They were Korean civilians, caught in the crossfire of this global power struggle. It's a number so huge it's almost impossible to comprehend.
And the legacy of this war is everywhere. It basically cemented the Cold War divide between the superpowers, it massively ramped up America's military buildup, and, most tragically, it made the division of Korea permanent, creating that hostile, tense, armed-to-the-teeth border we still see today. So we end up right back where we started. That armistice was a pause button, not a stop button. The conflict was essentially frozen in time, but it was never resolved. And it leaves us with this huge, lingering question. After all this time, after more than 70 years, what on earth will it finally take to turn this truce into a genuine, lasting peace?